Good morning. Seems like people are trickling in now, Lisa. I think we're...
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this morning.
Happy Wednesday. We're almost there. Give folks a minute or two to roll in, I think, Lisa.
Yeah, that's fine. I see Pathia on the call in the link. Good morning, Pathia. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, everybody who joined. There were about 30 folks in the waiting room when we opened it, so.
Wonderful.
That's exciting. Yeah, 33, yeah, about 30. All right. We should have had music playing, Lisa, this morning.
That would have been ideal.
That would have been ideal. We're all just glad to be here. Just glad to be here. All right. Do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to view my share tab so that folks won't really be able to see me so much, or I won't be able to see your chats, but Lisa's going to let me know if there's anything I need to pause for. So good morning and welcome to Engaging with Youth Impacted by Trauma by Maximizing Community Partnerships. Our agenda for this morning, we are going to do some brief introductions of ourselves, a brief overview of AVP, the Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia. We will talk through identifying and implementing those community partnerships, and then should have time for Q&A at the end. And please ask questions as we are talking in the chat. Lisa and Brandon and I are going to be trying to take turns monitoring the chat, so please do ask as we are going. So, who are we? Lisa, would you like to start and introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here today. My name is Lisa Christian. I'm the Director of Counseling Services with Anti-Violence Partnership.
And I am Emily DiCarlo. I am the Director of the Youth Violence Outreach Initiatives here at the Anti-Violence Partnership. I think between Lisa and I, we have decades of experience. I'm going to leave it at that. Working with youth in community-based settings in a variety of different locations and who have experienced various forms of complex trauma. So we are happy to be sharing some of what we've learned this morning with everyone, and hopefully can hear from you all as well. So a brief overview of AVP. AVP was founded in 1983 by Deborah Spungen. Deborah's daughter, Nancy Spungen, was killed by her boyfriend, Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols, Sid and Nancy. And after Nancy's murder, Deborah was looking for resources, was looking for support. And I think she saw on the news a story about parents of murdered children chapters in other cities, Chicago, Florida, and decided she wanted to start a Parents of Murdered Children support network here in Philadelphia, which she did in 1983, with support from the mayor and the district attorney at the time. And that was really innovative for Philadelphia at the time. And for the last 30 plus years, we have had programming based out of the district attorney's office. So we are grateful to Deborah, and we like to share the origin story of AVP as we start talking about any of the work that we do. AVP's mission is to end the cycle of violence by providing a wide range of free services, from support and counseling for victims to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of violence. We provide intervention, prevention, and support programs throughout Philadelphia in schools, social service agencies, the courts, and at other community sites. We are one of 7 victim service agencies in Philadelphia. So you can see this map here. We serve West and Southwest Philadelphia, which is this portion of Philadelphia over here, the 12th, 16th, 18th, and 19th police districts. See my little, can you see my mouse moving there? Yeah. So that's us. This is just a little bit about our structure. We are a nonprofit. So at the top of our structure is our board of directors. And then we have the executive director and our development director. And then we have 3 programmatic departments. We have our victim witness services, our counseling center, for which Lisa is the director, and youth violence outreach, for which I am the director. So our staff includes child and adult therapists, counselors, victim advocates, trainers, interns, administrators. And a little more detail about each of our programs. We have the victim witness services providing victim support in West Southwest Philadelphia, including emotional crisis support, court accompaniment, and assistance filing for victim compensation. And our Families of Murder Victims program is the continuing support program in the district attorney's office that provides court accompaniment and advocacy to anyone going through the homicide trial process in Philadelphia, from the investigative phase through preliminary hearings and sentencing. Our counseling center offers free individual therapy, short-term and long-term, to child, adolescents, and adults and families who are co-victims of homicide and those impacted by other forms of violence. We have group counseling and emotional support on request. And then YVO, our youth violence outreach program, provides free individual and group counseling services to youth ages 8 to 22 who've experienced the death of a loved one and or community violence. We are partnered with over 30 schools throughout Philadelphia and various community organizations. Annually, we serve about 3,000 victims of violence and co-victims of homicide. So specifically here, we're going to talk a lot about our YVO program, so I wanted to break that down a little bit for you. Our youth violence outreach program provides group counseling, individual services. We have parents and caregivers, youth, young adults. They are predominantly co-victims of homicide, but can be other victims as well, or have been identified by a partner as being at risk of violence. We provide these services in schools, community centers such as parks and rec sites, other social service agencies, Concilio, some churches, and other youth facilities, and out of our main office here in Fairmount, and also out of our West Philadelphia office. Our YVO therapists utilize all evidence-based modalities, including but not limited to trauma-focused CBT, motivational interviewing, play and sand trade therapy, and art therapy. We also utilize an evidence-based violence prevention curriculum for our youth who are identified as being at risk of violence. Our services are provided about weekly on an ongoing basis until the client decides to terminate services, or often through the length of a school year. These are just some of our partners at any point in time. I feel like this list is ever changing, but this is the school partners as of yesterday. All right. So we're going to talk through 2 partnerships that AVP has worked with out of YVO. One is with our Simon Gratz High School, which is a mastery charter school. That is one of our longest running community partnerships, and certainly I think one of our most impactful. And we are also then going to talk through our partnership with the First Tee, which is one of our newest partnerships, to talk through how we identify these partnerships, how we implement them, how we keep them going, and how we evaluate them. All right, Lisa, you are up.
Okay, I want to do just a brief overview about our partnership with Gratz and how it began. Could you put up the next slide, Emily? In 2012, AVP partnered with Simon Gratz on a part-time basis. We provided 4 hours of individual support to students who were identified by the social workers at the school who were in need of support as a result of some type of violence, be it community violence, be it co-victimization of homicide, physical abuse, sexual assault, and certainly community violence that is spreading throughout the Germantown area. In 2012, there was one therapist assigned to Gratz, and as all of you know, Simon Gratz Mastery is a huge school. It also contains prep, which is the school, which is the younger students, ages 13 through 15. And in 2015, the Gratz social work team requested additional supports based on increased homicides. And these were homicides that were occurring in the Tioga, Nicetown, Germantown area, parts of Albany. And through our work with Gratz, we also came to understand that the violence, although the violence was occurring throughout Germantown, we know that there were certain pockets in which violence was happening on a much frequent basis. And the violence, particularly violence related to youth, was happening far more frequently and as a result of retaliatory issues taking place in the neighborhoods. Retaliatory issues played a big part in it, issues related to the drug trade, and issues related to communities and to neighborhoods specific to blocks. There were certain blocks that were having issues with other blocks within that geographic region. We also know that there were groups of kids based on certain geographical regions, based on those regions, that were at odds with each other, or basically having beefs with each other in the communities in which they live. And that created a whole set of issues in and unto itself, because you had issues with neighborhoods, but you also had issues with neighborhoods in which kids were going to the same schools. So you have divided loyalties with some neighborhoods, specifically Brickyard, Germantown, Tioga. All of these groups individually are all intricately connected and interwoven into each other. All of these kids, they know each other, they're familiar with each other, they're familiar with each other's families, and you have really conflicting and really difficult and hard to measure issues that are becoming entrenched in these communities. In 2016, Gratz experienced the death of several students due to homicide. And it's not just 2016. We know that they experienced deaths in 2014. They experienced deaths in 2015. And in 2018, Gratz experienced the homicide of 8 of its students. They lost literally 8 students to homicide in a very short period of time. In addition to those 8 students, they lost a 9th student as a result of suicide. And the suicide occurred in May. The last homicide that Gratz experienced also occurred in May. So you have a school system, you have a community that is reeling as a result of all of these homicides. And we haven't even talked about the shootings that have taken place involving students, involving families who have been members of this community for long periods of time. Could you put the next slide up, Emily?
Yes. I have to switch my tab.
It's okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the approach that we take at AVP with respect to working in schools and working in communities. We take a trauma-focused lens And we look at things through a trauma-focused lens and a framework of care. And all that means is that we're taking a universal approach to care that understands that everyone we work with, everyone we come in contact with, may have experienced or have had exposure to trauma. And we recognize that our efforts to provide services, our efforts to provide support and care have to seek to prevent re-traumatization across all domains. We recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, and we integrate that knowledge into how we provide care and support, not just to the students we work with directly, but also to the communities and the agencies in which we work. We know that this perspective, this guide to how we do our work is strengths-based. And we know that we must utilize empathetic engagement. We have to advocate for social justice. And we know that this framework also promotes resilience and self-care. Next. I just wanted,
Sorry,
that's all right.
I'll fix
You're
it.
keeping us on our toes. That's all.
Like that.
The next slide just talks about trauma awareness. And we know that trauma manifests itself in many different ways. And for people who are not familiar with Bessel van der Kolk's work, The Body Keeps the Score. It is an excellent resource along with Judith Herman's work around trauma and recovery. We know that we need to learn as much about trauma as possible, because anytime you have a traumatized student as a result of any kind of violence, you don't just have a traumatized student, you then have a traumatized family. And I really want to amplify and I really want to highlight this point, because oftentimes when we're thinking about providing services, we're doing it at the exclusion of either the families, the communities, the schools, the agencies in which services are provided. We need to keep in mind that any part of a system that becomes traumatized, the whole system is then traumatized. And I can't highlight that enough because, you know, it's said that many of us work in our own separate silos, but that is true with respect to how we're providing services or how many agencies are still providing services. Some agencies are definitely on board with this approach, but there are many agencies, many providers who are still very much singling out and not providing services in a systemic, holistic manner. And we want to try to the best of our ability to be able to work against that. Could you put up the next slide?
Hopefully.
We can't have a discussion about trauma without keeping in mind the systemic structural issues that exist, not just within communities, but also within the programs, the structures, the policies, and the laws that govern our work. And it's important to remember that issues of microaggression, issues of systemic racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, all of these issues are at play. And for those of you who are familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, we know that on the left of our screen, when you see that first ACEs pyramid, we know that when ACEs was first developed, ACEs was not developed with the issues of racism in mind. It wasn't developed with the issues of sexism in mind, historical trauma, issues of generational trauma. None of these things were a part of the original ACEs study. But as time has gone on and as research has been done, we know that All of these issues that we see embedded in the bottom part on the right of our screen having to do with that expanded ACEs study. We know that adverse childhood experiences don't just start with a child's experience in the home with maybe physical abuse. It starts prior to birth. It starts with the historical trauma that each ethnic group has experienced in this country. It has started with issues Native Americans have experienced with the genocide that has taken place in many tribes. We know that for African Americans, the experience of slavery, all of these experiences, Japanese Americans with the internment camps, all of these experiences have shaped our social structures, our policies, our laws, our implicit bias, how microaggressions get manifested. All of these things occur on the bottom level. These issues you oftentimes cannot see that are impacting families and impacting communities for decades and for centuries. And that ripple effect, those, that ponding that you get, these issues have played out over a period of generations, long before you get to an actual adverse experience. So I just wanted to amplify that and to highlight that as we move further into the presentation. Are there any questions? Are there any comments anyone wants to make with respect to that? We welcome the dialogue.
I don't see any questions in the chat. I did see Earldine agreeing strongly with your points.
Okay. All right, let's move forward. We also have to keep in mind issues of intersectionality. And all intersectionality has to do with is the premise that all of us, we live multiple layered identities derived from social relations, history, the operation of structures of power. And people are and can be members of more than one community at the same time while simultaneously experiencing issues of oppression and privilege. And I also want to highlight too, if you go to the next slide, Emily, sure. I also want to highlight too that in the backdrop of all of these issues, we also have issues not just dealing with trauma, but issues of civil unrest, issues of housing insecurity, homelessness, poor water quality. We all know what's going on in Flint, Michigan with the water crisis. Michigan is still experiencing a water crisis. And there are other parts of this country who are also experiencing a crisis as it relates to clean drinking water. But more specifically, clean drinking water in areas that are predominantly or disproportionately affecting pockets of people who are not only economically disadvantaged, but also people of color. We have to keep in mind that while all of these issues are going on with gun violence, we are also being impacted by other epidemics simultaneously. Epidemics of not just gun violence, not just COVID, but epidemics of poverty, epidemics of poor and substandard educational systems, HIV/AIDS. All of these epidemics are going on simultaneously, not just COVID. We have to stop thinking about these issues being separate and apart. They are all interwoven, interconnected, and they are impacting all of us, not just the clients that we work with, not just the communities that we work with. And we also have to pay attention to the co-occurring issues. Co-occurring issues of substance use, substance abuse, people using as a coping strategy. And, you know, we oftentimes have this tendency to point our finger at people who are using substances and encourage them to just stop, to just go seek treatment. But we also have to keep in mind that while people are going to seek treatment, they don't have anything to replace those coping skills with. They're using maladaptive coping skills to be able to deal with the pain, the suffering that's going on either with themselves and or their family systems. And we have to be more empathetic, and we have to be more trauma aware and trauma informed about the systems in which people are going to go seek services and support. We also know that disproportionately, people of color are dealing with missing persons issues. Structurally, we know that we have the media, we have other institutions within our communities that don't do a real good job of reflecting what the issues are that are entrenched in communities of color, particularly communities of color that are low income, that are not receiving their fair share with respect to housing opportunities, with respect to educational opportunities, with respect to employment opportunities. All of these issues are playing a part in the systemic structural problems that we see existing in Philadelphia, in addition to leadership issues around gun violence and around other systemic problems as it relates to violence. Next slide, Emily. I just wanted to highlight, and I apologize in advance because I made this screen blue and I shouldn't have, now that I've had a couple of chances to see it. But let's see if we can work with it anyway. In the academic year of September through June of 2017, Simon Gratz referred 22 students to AVP. In that year, the median age of the students that were referred were 16. 20 were African American, 1 was Afro-Caribbean, 1 was Haitian and Hispanic. The students self-identified gender, 10 were female, 12 were male. Of the 22 students who were referred, 19 of them were co-victims of homicide. 5 of them had experienced the homicide of a family member. 1 of them experienced the homicide of their intimate partner, who, by the way, was a grad student. 9 of them experienced the homicide of a peer, and 4 of them witnessed the homicide in their community. In 2018, 25 students were referred by the social work team. And I just want to stop and give a quick shout out to the social work team at Gratz. They have an awesome social work team at Gratz. They are dedicated, they are committed, and they have worked through every homicide as a collective. They have done outreach, they have sought services, they have participated in all kinds of anti-violence issues. They have worked with community leaders. They've also worked with family members. So I just want to give a quick shout out to them because Gratz would not be what it is without that social work team. So I digress, but I want to go back to the number of students that were referred in 2018. The median age was 16. 20 of the students were African American, 3 identified as Afro-Caribbean, 1 was Haitian, and 1 Hispanic. 15 of those students were male and 10 identified as female. And out of that 25, 9 of the students were co-victims of homicide. Six students experienced the homicide of a family member, 3 experienced the homicide of a peer, and 2 witnessed a homicide in the community. And I want to make it clear that these are students that were identified by the social work team. We know that there are many more students that social workers tried to reach to encourage them to seek support, but some of them, for whatever their reason, was not ready to receive services at that time. We also know that while I have highlighted some of the issues with respect to the types of homicide that kids experience, we know that many of these students have experienced the loss of multiple peers. They've experienced the loss of multiple family members as a result of homicide, and as a result of shootings, as a result of stabbings and other forms of violence. We also know that in 2019, 15 students were referred. The mean age of those students was 15 years. 14 were African American, 1 was Hispanic.
Oh, sorry.
You there? We also know that of that 15, 14 were all co-victims of homicide. 4 experienced the homicide of a family member. 9 experienced the homicide of a peer. The reason why the number is so low in 2019 is because that is when COVID hit. And many of the students stopped coming to school consistently. So our services were not as consistent in 2019. And in 2020, while students were doing virtual learning, we know that we received 6 referrals. But I can tell you that of those 6 referrals, none of the students responded well to telehealth or virtual sessions. Most of the students, in fact, made it perfectly clear that they did not want to, for whatever reason, receive virtual support at home. And we heard from students that talked about having virtual sessions go on in their home, and some of the homes were experiencing issues with the conditions of their homes. They were fearful about reports being made to the Department of Human Services. Some were talking about living in overcrowded conditions that they did not want exposed as a result of virtual and telehealth sessions. So I just wanted to put that out there, because that was certainly a barrier in 2019 and in 2020 with respect to how we did services. For Gratz, as with many of our schools, it is preferable to provide the services in school where students are. We have access. We do not have the same kinds of access when students are learning from home or trying to learn from home. We also experienced an unprecedented amount of absences that, while many students, were to receive virtual learning, we know that did not occur in 2019 and 2020. So I know I've said a mouthful, so if anybody has any questions, any comments, we can certainly take them at this time.
I also just want to maybe, for context for this 2021 school year, say that we've already had about 10, I'm going to say, off the top of my head, referrals. So we're likely on track to be back where we were in 2017, 2018.
No comments? No.
See any?
Okay. All right. Let's move on. As a result of the amount of homicides that have occurred, AVP has adopted the school-based core trauma-focused PFA, or psychological first aid curriculum. We provide crisis support, we provide crisis management, and grief support in the aftermath of a homicide. And that's not just to students. This is also for school administrators, school counselors, any support staff at the school, anyone who expresses a need around these kinds of issues in dealing with the loss and the trauma that comes as a result of a violent death. We will provide that service. And part of what we try to stress to the school is we want to provide three core and basic tenets of trauma-focused psychological first aid. And the first is to provide safety. And I'm not just talking physical safety, I'm talking about emotional safety. Providing a safe space where people can begin to share what they are experiencing emotionally, what they are experiencing in their bodies, how they are dealing with managing their affect in the aftermath of really, really difficult and really, really sad issues related to homicide. And, you know, teachers, coaches, support staff, they are with the kids primarily from early morning to late in the afternoon. They sometimes spend more time during the weekday than their families do. And we recognize the difficulty and the emotional toll that it can take on staff with respect to dealing with these issues. And I also want to point out that many of the school staff also live in the neighborhoods in which they work. So oftentimes there are very few degrees of separation with respect to what is going on in the school and what is going on in the communities in which they live. And I also want to point out too that we want to provide containment. How do we hold affective expression? How do we contain these issues in such a way that people can still be able to teach when you have to teach in a classroom where there's an empty desk from a student who's been murdered? And we're not just talking about an empty desk. We're talking about the presence of a student that's absent. How do you help a classroom be able to move forward? How do you recognize the death in such a way that you can hold space for it, as well as be able to continue to provide education to the rest of the students who come to school? How do you hold space for your students who may start to cry, who may start to have bursts of anger, who ask questions about why this is happening? When is it going to end? How are they going to get support? All of these things that, we oftentimes don't think of when we're talking about schools being impacted. Students and teachers form bonds and relationships over the course of years and sometimes lifetimes. We hear teachers talk about how they, if they transition from one school to another, they may have transitioned from an elementary school to a high school but they also may have transitioned from teaching one of the students who've been killed. They may know their family. They may know their siblings. They may have taught their siblings. They may have had contact and communication with the parents or the foster parents or the other guardians. All of these things need to be taken under consideration when we're talking about providing this level of support. And when we're talking about containment and safety, we also have to keep in mind that we only are dealing with factual information. Part of the reason why I really enjoy working with this model is it because it keeps us focused on understanding that when we are talking with students about homicides, because the neighborhood talks, kids talk, kids are on social media all day long, all evening long. They have access and they are privy to tons and tons and bits of information. And oftentimes they want to bring that information or they contribute that information or volunteer that information. But when we're talking about providing this type of intervention, we only talk about factual information, not gossip, not conjecture, not what we think could have, would have, should have happened. We don't do any of that. We stay away from that, and we encourage the school staff to stay away from that as well. And that is part of how we provide and how we encourage stabilization. We want to foster adaptive short and long-term coping strategies. We want to ask people what is best for you. We don't go in telling people what they need to do, what they ought to do, what they should do. We have to listen to them and talk about what the issues are that are important to them. Because at the end of the day, they are going to be with their peers and they are going back to the same communities in which these events, these homicides, the shootings, and other forms of community violence are taking place. We want to enhance natural resilience. And I can't stress that to you enough. We know that our kids are resilient because in spite of what is going on with the level of shootings, we still see students who are getting up every day, who are going to school every day, who are still very much engaged, who are still very much intertwined and entrenched with the activities and with the school life that is going on every day. And not just at Gratz, but across the city. And we need to keep that in mind as we're providing support to them. We need to remind them about their resilience. We need to remind them when they are not just doing well, but we also have to remember that we have to instill a sense of hope, hope about the future and what the possibilities are for the future, despite what is going on in their present circumstance. We want to give time, resources. And this has become a crucial issue because as many organizations are inundated with referrals, AVP is too inundated with referrals. We have now over 200 people on our waiting list. And for students and faculty, staff, support staff who are in need of more support than what we can provide at the school, we would encourage them to get on our wait list. But that's problematic at this time. We are trying to expand our services and be able to take all of those clients off of the wait list. But right now, we're not able to do that. as many organizations are struggling as a result of this issue with gun violence. It is unconscionable to ask people who are victims and co-victims of violence to wait 6, 8, 9 months to receive services and support. It is unconscionable. But these are also the realities of the system at this time. And I just wanted to put that out there because it continues to be an issue. Emily, could you put up the next slide, please? When, we have been at Gratz long enough to learn about not just only the great support that kids get in school, but I also want to draw attention to the partnerships that Gratz and AVP has been able to form over the course of years. And I want to draw attention to Philadelphia Ceasefire. For those of you who are familiar with Marla over at Ceasefire, Marla's team has done a phenomenal job with providing supports in the form of people who literally come into the school that help provide direct, not just, I want to say direct service, but they provide more than direct service because they literally have the ability, even during COVID, to go to homes where kids are living, where kids are at odds, having beefs with each other, and across neighborhoods to help facilitate, to help mediate disputes, to help youth find jobs, to help youth find alternatives to the violence that is plaguing the communities. So I just want to say, that anytime that I call Marla or anybody at Ceasefire to help and assist, particularly around issues of retaliatory violence, I'm always met with okay, how can we help? What do you need? Where do you need us to be? Where do we need to go? And all we do is provide the information the factual information that we know. And I know that while Ceasefire is located in the school, we know that they're also going to go out to the neighborhoods and the communities in which these issues are not just developing, but also these issues have been developing over a course of time. And they have the expertise, they have the ability to join with people in the community because they are dedicated and committed, and they know the streets. They understand the streets. They understand the culture of the streets. They have the ability to do what AVP and what other organizations cannot do on the ground. I also want to draw your attention to Resources for Human Development because they have been part of the Gratz community providing in-school support. And one of the things that we know has worked well at Gratz, we have monthly trauma support team meetings. And what we do is the second Tuesday of every month, we get together, all of the support staff get together, and we literally go case by case through issues that are impacting students with respect to violence. And not just the students, but also the community. Whatever issues that are going on outside of the community that is influencing the climate and influencing the culture that is existing inside of the school, we address that at that time. If we need more resources, we have the ability to do that. If we need to provide some PFAs, we have the ability to do that. If we need to talk with other community members, we will find a way to be able to do that as well. We know that the Network of Neighbors has worked very closely with Gratz and with AVP over a period of years, particularly in the aftermath of homicide. When AVP runs short on staff, we can always connect with the network of neighbors to figure out a date where they can go in and we can provide support in the form of crisis response and also grief support. In the past couple of years, we've definitely used core Good Shepherd mediation. And if you are looking for a program to come in and help with mediation services, I would strongly recommend you connect with Good Shepherd. And certainly Uplift Center for Grieving Children. Uplift has been a central part, and kudos to them, because when we contact them for larger, when we're in need of larger supports on a more grander scale, they definitely will send their staff to partner with us to provide, again, trauma support and grief support services. And they will also take cases individually. So I just want to thank all of these organizations for their time, their energy, and their expertise, because we do not do this work alone. We have to do this work in partnership with other agencies and with other community members. And if does anyone have any questions, that really concludes my portion of the presentation about Simon Gratz.
There's a question in the chat, Lisa, about what therapeutic interventions have been most effective in dealing with retaliatory violence after a homicide.
We found that group meetings, we find that meeting with people who are directly related to these issues. And I'm not just talking about people who hear gossip. I'm talking about people who are the key players that are involved. When we are able to meet with them to talk specifically about what the issues are, what they're experiencing, and we cannot do that alone. Oftentimes we will bring ceasefire into this because we can only provide the services that are taking place in the school. We need to have people who are outside of the school, people who have the ability to go to homes, who have the ability to go to neighborhoods and talk with the other youth that are involved in helping to stem the retaliatory violence that's going on. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Any comments?
I'm just going to let that picture linger for a minute because it's great.
Thank you, Lisa. I agree. Our outreach team is phenomenal. They go the extra mile with in-person engagement to bring the services, support, and information to those we serve. Pathia, I echo that, and I agree. They do not get, or they do not receive the thank yous. This keep in mind, they are doing a thankless job. No one is out there saying we appreciate what you're doing. So I appreciate your comment, Pathia. Thank you. Collaboration makes it work. Tawana, you're absolutely correct. None of us can do any of this work by ourselves. We definitely have to collaborate, and I would say that we need much more collaboration. We need many more partnerships because these issues are complex, and complex issues require complex solutions. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate you all. Okay, let's switch gears. Emily, you want to talk about First T?
Yes. So I'm gonna switch gears. And we had a new partnership this year with the First T that I will talk about. And If there are questions, let me know, Lisa, because I'm going to pop off this screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So AVP in the first T, we started in the summer of 2021. Obviously, that was a very interesting time in the world. We had 24 youth participants in our first program. We had 8 boys and 16 girls. 96% of the students were BIPOC. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And they were young, ages 5 to 11. So we were really looking at providing some summer programming out of school time for youth in a safe and trauma-informed environment. We had outreach to multiple partner schools and sites. We ended up with youth from 8 different zip codes, and they had multiple types of victimization, including bullying, victims of assault, domestic violence, co-victims of homicide and robbery, and also specifically a lot of witness to and threats of community violence. So I'll follow up on that. So we started with a needs assessment. So we knew we had youth from our partner schools and sites who had been engaged with YVO in some capacity during the school year. And with the increased homicide rate and the increase in youth violence rate in the city, we were very concerned about what our kids were going to do over the summer when the weather got warm. There had also been several homicides that had occurred at rec centers or on basketball courts in the city. And so we'd heard from a lot of our parents and from our partners that they didn't feel like they could just go send their kids to the basketball court to burn off some of that energy. I had also had youth express an interest in golf, specifically in a crisis response group that I had done at a middle school in West Philadelphia. When I asked the youth, one of the questions we ask them when we do that PFA response that Lisa was just talking about, one of the things we ask them is, what do they need? What do they need to feel safe? What do they need to feel like they are cared about? What do they need? Doesn't mean that we can always do it, but we like to know what they need. And one group in particular said that they wanted opportunities to learn golf and other skills. Debate team was another one they said, but for folks on golf. And so I was like, well, I feel like we can make that happen. I feel like we can do that. The other piece of this is that there were 2 options, one being Walnut Lane Golf Course in Roxborough, which is in the northwest-ish part of the city, and then John F. Byrne in northeast. And then we had to figure out when we were going to meet once a week for an hour, and what would that time look like together. So why golf? I'm going to play this. I hope.
We use golf, game that is probably the most challenging game that you can play as a tool to help kids for life.
They really help us to network, to connect. We really get better with our game. They're really just somewhere that we can grow. It's just about building the connections, making friends, playing and having fun.
This more than a game. It helps them be more independent, more secure as a person, helping others. I think it has given them more confidence, and I think that helps them with everything else.
It's just an amazing sport, and it's open for everyone, especially the 9 core values. Is very practical. You see the coaches modeling it, when they take them out to the golf courses, just by the way you're supposed to walk, when you're talking to someone, looking in their faces, how you have to shake someone's hand, just those basic human interaction. It's a big growth, and parents, they're going to see amazing changes in their kids.
It's taught me not to doubt myself, and it's taught me to never give up, because everything's not going to be perfect the first time. So if you keep going, you'll eventually get where you need to be.
This game is about perseverance. You may hit some bad shots. You know, that's okay. You're going to have some bumps in the road, but keep going.
Having companies invest in First Tee and give their time and resources is invaluable, because we definitely could not do everything that we're able to do and provide the experiences that we provide for our participants without their support. So it just opens the door for us to give more impactful experiences to the kids in the program.
There. Okay, so I think you sort of heard a lot of the core values and the lessons learned. Persistence was one of the things we talked about a lot over the summer. So really for us, this sort of lined up with the kind of social emotional learning we want to provide to our youth and to our younger youth in a structured, safe way. So one of the things we did was look at the need in the city for where there might be youth who are at increased risk of violence. So this is the Philadelphia City Controller gun violence map that I have then put our little notes on. But the dark red areas are high rates of gun violence, and then lighter moves down. So we were able to target as much as possible youth who might be in risky areas, high risk areas, not necessarily safe to play outside. And also areas where there's not a lot of green space, so South Philadelphia in particular. So we were able to look at that. The other piece that I really want to point out is that this program, for whatever reason, engaged a lot of our AAPI, Asian American and Pacific Islander identified families who over the course of last year experienced a lot of concern for their safety in the city and in the community because of the pandemic and because of increased reports of violence towards that community. And so we were able to provide them with safe activities for their kids to do where they felt like they could let them leave the house. They weren't worried about to and from transportation to and from and those kind of things. So I do want to point out that we did that was a great response to this call for programming. So then we wanted to identify, how do we identify an appropriate partner? So first of all, we had AVP head staff that had worked with this partner in the past. And then when I met with them, they have an SEL curriculum that was already in place that aligned with our curriculum and our goals and what we're trying to do. They have a strong record of working within the community. They're familiar with the community. They are part of the community. And so we were able to feel comfortable in their knowledge of the youth we are working with. We didn't have to provide a lot of additional training to their staff and their volunteers. And they were able to help and had some funding to support this pilot project. I also just want to say that the pictures on here are actually all pictures of our programming from this summer. It was hard to pick just a few. So one of the things that often, comes up when we're looking at new partnerships is that we need to identify and address the barriers and challenges. Funding for a project like this is always a challenge because AVP is funded predominantly through state and federal grants. State and federal grants don't necessarily want to fund kids going out and playing anything, but golf in particular. We were fortunate to have some private foundation dollars to cover the cost of this, of our staff time and other logistical costs, food, snacks, transportation, we'll get to in a minute. And First Tee was also able to contribute some funds. The second challenge that was a huge challenge was the transportation piece. So if you'll remember from the map, we had youth in South Philly and North Philly. And we needed to figure out a way to get them safely to the golf course at 4:00 on Mondays for 6 weeks. So we actually contacted one of the local yellow school bus companies in Philadelphia. And a family-owned bus company, one of the ones that contracts with the Philadelphia School District. So we knew that their staff were licensed and background checked. And we chartered a bus that picked up the youth every Monday and picked them up from their door and delivered them home to their door. And I think that was really important for our parents and caregivers to hear because of the concerns about youth standing on the sidewalk, waiting for a bus, doing XYZ, and it not being safe. And so we were able to deliver them door to door every Monday. The capacity, yes.
Emily, we have a question in the chat from Sarah. She wants to know, do you collaborate with CHOP's Violence Prevention Program?
Well, we do. Yeah, we are CHOP's Violence Prevention Program. Yes, several of them. Rodney, Elaine, and Sunny were all at one of our events on Monday, and we do work closely with them. And we are hoping to actually start a pilot group specifically with them. We are meeting on Friday to talk about for youth who are survivors of gunshot wounds. Denise asked, how much did I have to pay that company to do the transportation? It was, I'm going to say it was $250 each ride, and First Tee split the cost with us. So we used the foundation money to pay for that, and First Tee paid for half. It was, so I just want to say, Denise, when we ran the numbers, so for us to have either had staff transport and then have to have our insurance cover it and to do the mileage reimbursement and those pieces that we would have had to do, or to like rent a car or a van or something, it actually ended up being more cost effective to have a chartered bus company do that for the number of kids we were picking up. Of the 24 participants, we ended up picking up about half, about 12 of them. Good questions. Thank you. Staff capacity was an issue, challenge. As Lisa had said, we are all at capacity, and this required that, you know, somebody give up basically their entire Monday for 6 weeks. So what we did was we rotated through the YVO staff team, myself included, and there was always at least one staff member on the bus and maybe an intern on the bus, and then 2 staff members who met us at the golf course. So they had to give less time, but there were still 3 or 4 staff members there. And honestly, with First Tee, they were so well trained and so well staffed also that we were probably overstaffed, but we wanted to be safe, you know, and make sure. And because it was a new partnership, I was there every week, or another director was there to make sure that we were just well represented. There were a lot of logistics. I spent a lot of time. I was the point person for parents, and I did a lot of calling to parents. I did a lot of last minute shifts and changes in pickup scheduling. So there is, I do want to say that, like, for a project like this, there needed to be a point person for logistics. In this case, it was me. And then identifying participants. So we needed to identify participants. When we started getting the referrals in, we saw that the vast majority of the participants were going to be elementary school age kids. So we worked with the couple of teenagers that had signed up to find them something else to do. And we also wanted to make sure that the parents understood that while, yes, their youth had probably experienced or witnessed some kind of violence, that this was not going to be a processing group, that we were just here to do the social emotional learning piece. So I was just showing this little video of us getting on the bus. There we go. They pick us up from our office every Monday, and we were the first to get picked up. So there was always a staff member on the bus and the last to be dropped off. And so there was always one person, at least one adult on the bus with the bus driver, and at least 2 adults with the children. The supervision and oversight, again, like I said, I did a lot of that management to make sure that all the moving parts were in place. I did a lot of communicating with the parents. As you can imagine, at 4 o'clock in Philadelphia on a Monday, the traffic sometimes did not work in our favor getting from South Philly to Roxborough. And so we had to communicate often that we were running behind, or we were running early, or whatever the case may be. We also made sure we always had water and snacks on the bus. It was summer, and so we did have a couple of 90-degree-plus days. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to have all of the basic needs met: water, food, and we had a first aid kit. And then we did have an end of summer celebration, a pizza party. All of the participants got certificates, and they did a water balloon fight as their last activity, and they had a lot of fun. So I think that having that sort of ceremonial piece for the youth who participated in all 6 to 8 weeks was really important. Oh. Yeah. So then the last thing that both Lisa and I, for Gratz and for First Tee and for all of our programming, is that we talk about evaluation, right? So how do we know that what we're doing is impactful, both in the like qualitative sense and like, are we actually reducing PTSD symptoms and building resiliency skills? And so we assess our clients in a variety of ways. For our individual folks, we do use a PTSD symptom scale, and we use the Connor-Davidson resiliency scale for those clients we meet with individually at Gratz and other schools. And then we also do a pre and post survey for our youth who participate in any of our group programming. And one of the things we ask at the end of the group at the post survey are, what are some of the things you have learned? What would you share? And so I like to just share some of these quotes from our youth from last year, so that you can see that we really do feel like we are having an impact on their experience, and that we are giving them some resources and some protective factors in this really challenging time they are growing up in. Okay, we have about 15 minutes. Questions? Any questions that people might have about either of our programs?
Or comments.
Or comments, yeah. I'm happy to we had our emails at the beginning, but I'm going to put them here in case folks do have questions or comments after the fact or want to reach out. Yeah, that's a great question, Dana. Yeah, we would love that. We are in the process of starting a youth advisory council, Dana, and so we are in the recruitment process for that, and we are hopeful that would be one of the benefits of the youth advisory council would be that youth who may have been partnered with YVO or in one of our programs is able to come and give feedback to us, and we also would give them some learning experiences, some leadership experience, those kind of things to help. So that's a great question, Dana. Gabrielle, thank you for the question. Will AVP be able to do First Tee again? I hope so. On September 1st, the first day of school, had parents asking if we were going to do First Tee again. It only ended like a week or two prior. So yeah, I've told them that we will definitely at least do it again in the summer.
Tawana, thank you for your comment. Thank you for your comment, Pathia.
Yeah, thank you all.
We appreciate you. And Gabrielle, thank you for your comment, and
Yeah,
thank
thanks
you
for
participating today. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Gabrielle is a longtime AVP staff member, and we appreciate all that you do.
Thank you. I think then, yeah, if people want to leave, you are welcome to leave. If you want to stay and ask questions, we are happy to stay for a few minutes, I think. Hi, Brandon.
Hello. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your support, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for your help.
And your question.
right. I feel like nobody has any more questions. Are we good, Brandon?
Yeah, I was just waiting to see if any
Yeah, me too.
questions trickled in.
Yeah.
I have one for you guys.
Sure.
How have you worked family involvement with the youth, especially with retaliatory violence, with the survivors of homicide?
That's a great question. Typically, we will ask youth if they want us to have contact with their parents. For youth who are under 14, they are required to have parental permission. But for youth who are 14 and over, they do not require parental consent. But we ask them if they would mind if we connected with their parent. There are some youth who will say, sure, go right ahead. And they will give us the contact information for their parent or caregiver, foster parent or guardian, and we can connect with them to find out from their perspective what's going on with the kid and how much do they know about what's going on. More often than not, parents, caregivers, they know that something is going on. They may not know all the details, but they know something is going on, and they welcome the support and intervention. But there are some kids, however, who will say, absolutely not, because of whatever issues that are going on in the house, or the relationship they have to the parent. Some kids do not trust the parent to be able to not only deal with the information, but because of issues of substance use, abuse, neglect, or they just don't get along. They do not want us to disclose, and we have to respect that. We believe that kids and adults are the experts of their lives. They know which family members they can trust and who they can't trust. So we follow their lead.
Excellent.
I would also just add, I think one of the surprising impacts of the pandemic and doing telehealth with those who did want to engage in telehealth is that we did have a lot more parent involvement, because as you would imagine, when you're sitting meeting with your therapist in your living room or any part of your house, that we did end up having a lot more parent involvement, and that was really great in some cases. So we are trying to keep that line of communication open with those where we've started.
Yeah, I know my experience has been that if you can find one family member that's a resource, a lot of times it's a grandmother or an uncle or an aunt, hearing the message from them is much more impactful than hearing it from a caseworker or a therapist, or that's just been my experience.
Yeah, and they want involvement. They want to know how their kid is doing, and oftentimes they will share that they're worried or they're concerned about what's going on with their kid. They want to know. They want to be helpful.
Well, hey, I want to thank you guys again. Excellent presentation, very insightful. It looks like we're not getting any more questions, so I'm going to end the broadcast. And you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
It was nice meeting you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Take care, everybody.